Week 13 of the fantasy season is here, so before you set those final starting lineups, here are 5 stats that you need to know before Week 13 of the fantasy season. Let's start with quarterback Matthew Stafford. He's playing some of the very best football of his entire career. He has scored at least 22 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games, including 2 with 26 or more fantasy points. He has the league's top wide receiver duo in Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, and he leads the league in red zone passing attempts. So even though the Panthers allow the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks and the 8th fewest fantasy points overall to quarterbacks, he is still on the QB1 radar moving into Week 13. And I've gotten a lot of questions throughout the week about Matthew Stafford versus other quarterbacks, and I have talked about this Panthers defense throughout the course of the season as being a quietly good defense, and they are good against the pass overall. This is a road game for the Rams, but Matthew Stafford, in my eyes, should just be in starting fantasy lineups for the rest of the season. I am not benching Stafford, especially with the Rams looking like the top overall seed in the NFC as things stand right now. They're going to continue to try and win each and every game here as we wrap up the season to hold that top seed. So Matthew Stafford, even on the road here against a defense that did have success against Brock Purdy this past week in terms of causing turnovers, 3 interceptions from the Panthers this past week against Purdy, Stafford is still a must-start quarterback. No matter what you guys do, you are still starting Matthew Stafford, who's averaging the 5th most fantasy points per game at the quarterback position here in Week 13 of the season. All right, running back Travis Etienne and the Jaguars running game could have a huge overall day here in Week 13 behind an offensive line that ranks 3rd in run block win rate at 74.3%. They will face a Titans defense that's allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Etienne has averaged 20.5 touches and 18 fantasy points over his past 4 games. He has been the clear-cut RB1 for the Jaguars, but he's another player who I've gotten a lot of questions about throughout the course of the week, and I just think Etienne has really solidified himself as a must-start player. This is still a great matchup. The Titans, a bottom 10 unit overall in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. Nearly 1,200 rushing yards allowed by the Titans on the season. 13 rushing touchdowns, 235 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. So 15 total touchdowns allowed to running backs so far in the course of the season. And I know, Breece Hall Tutin's come into the conversation here, but I felt like I was one of the few people going into Week 12 who was low on Breece Hall Tutin, who didn't view Breece Hall Tutin as a flex option. He could get in the mix here in Week 13. The matchup is there. The game script could certainly be there as well. But for me, I still view this as Etienne's backfield at the end of the day. Etienne still saw the most snaps of any running back for the Jaguars this past week at 65%. And yeah, I won't be surprised if Tutin gets some sort of involvement or scampers into the end zone. But I also won't be entirely surprised if the Titans, who showed up offensively in Week 12, have a little bit of pushback in this game, and I still think Etienne is going to see the bulk of the carries. So I think he's a must-start running back. Once again, I got a lot of questions about him throughout the course of the week. He needs to be in starting fantasy lineups, averaging 14.9 fantasy points per game on the season, the RB15 in full PPR, the RB12 in half PPR, and like we said over the past 4 weeks, he has been fantastic. So in my eyes, Travis Etienne still a must-start running back here in Week 13 of the season. All right, it's going to make a lot of sense for the Jets to lean heavily on running back Breece Hall here in Week 13 and an offensive line that is quietly ranking 10th in run block win rate at 71.7%, especially with Garrett Wilson out and Josh Reynolds currently on injured reserve. And Hall has averaged 19.3 touches and 13.9 fantasy points per game over his past 3 outings. And Atlanta is giving up the 10th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs in a bottom 5 team in terms of overall fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs. So this is a smash spot for Breece Hall. I felt like I didn't get a lot of questions about Breece Hall throughout the course of the week, but anytime he came up on this week's live stream or in the comments in terms of questions, I did tell you guys I view Breece Hall as a must-start running back here in week 13 this season. This is kind of a weird overall, like, gross matchup. Tyrod Taylor versus Kirk Cousins, two wishy-washy defenses here. But what we do know is that this Atlanta Falcons run defense has been awful. And like we already stated, one of the worst defenses in terms of fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs. Just under 1,200 rushing yards allowed, a total of 11 touchdowns allowed to running backs on the season. And it feels like Breece Hall, who hasn't scored since week 10 of the season, is due for a touchdown. He's still seeing very good overall usage and volume, 71% or more of the snaps in the past 3 games. He has a double-digit touches in each of the last 3 games as well. Just hasn't found the end zone outside of a receiving touchdown in week 10 against the Browns. So this is a great spot. The Jets have been on the road in 2 straight games. They're at home here against the Falcons. Like I said, we mentioned Garrett Wilson, no Josh Reynolds, but, John Mechie has been filling in nicely, and A.D. Mitchell's getting some targets, and I guess Mason Taylor's there at tight end, but there really isn't a fluent passing game here. They will rely on Breece Hall in this Week 13 matchup, who, should have probably had a touchdown in Week 12, but ended up fumbling near the goal line on a drive where he was having a lot of success running the football. And at the end of the day, he is getting some involvement still in the passing game as well. So Breece Hall, a must-start running back, a player that I think you guys should undoubtedly have across all your starting lineups here in Week 13 of the season. And I'm doubling down and headed straight to Underdog to take the over on Breece Hall to score a rushing touchdown here in Week 13 of the season. Don't forget, all new users who sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH are getting a free NFL Pick'em to use towards Week 13 NFL action. Take that free Pick'em, take Hall to score a touchdown. If both of those lines hit, you're going to automatically double your cash entry. And on top of that, as long as you guys sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH, that link is down below. As soon as you play through $5 on Underdog, they're going to give you $50 in bonus funds to use towards Week 13 NFL action. So make sure you guys sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH if you want to take advantage of all of their Week 13 exclusive NFL offers. All right, Saints tight end Jawan Johnson has been a huge part of the offense as of late. Over his past 5 games, he's averaged 6 targets and 13 fantasy points per game. And the Saints could end up facing a negative game script this week against the Dolphins. And that Dolphins defense allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, and overall a bottom 5 team in terms of fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends. So this is a smash spot for Jawan Johnson, who's been as solid as a streaming option as you could have at the tight end position over the past couple of weeks. And really, I don't view him as a streaming option. He's 74% rostered. He is just a start with 10 or more fantasy points in every game since week 7. Hasn't mattered if it's been Spencer Rattler or Tyler Shuck at quarterback. He has seen the involvement. He has seen the snaps. Now, I know there's some fear, like this week with no Alvin Kamara, we could see more Taysom Hill on the field, could see him hurt some of these potential snaps to Jawan Johnson, but man, this is just way too good of a matchup. The Dolphins, the 4th most fantasy points overall allowed to opposing tight ends. You got to feel good here. 760 receiving yards off of 68 receptions allowed, 7 receiving touchdowns allowed to tight ends on the year. This is a good spot. And once again, while I do think that the Dolphins could end up struggling this week, like a lot of people just viewing the Dolphins as a clear-cut favorite here, I think the Saints could kind of surprise us, although the Saints were very bad this past week. I do think that even if this is a negative or positive game script for the Saints, either way, Jawan Johnson's going to see plenty of involvement. So if you guys own Jawan Johnson, if you're looking for help at tight end, whatever it may be, I think Jawan Johnson is a must-start tight end with a very safe floor here in Week 13 of the season. All right, Seahawks running back Kenneth Walker has seen at least 13 touches in each of the past 4 games, including one game with 19 total touches. He's averaged 12.3 fantasy points per game during that stretch, and Seattle's offensive line has been dominant, ranking 6th in run block win rate at 73.1%. The Seahawks are double-digit favorites in this matchup against the Vikings, which should set up an ideal game script for Walker and the Seahawks running attack. So I am a fan of just starting Kenneth Walker straight up here in Week 13. And you guys know I've not been very confident in either Seahawks running back throughout the course of the season. It's been a very difficult backfield to really call, and I haven't really viewed either guy as more of a flex option throughout the course of the season because of the split in the overall volume that these two guys end up getting, right? But the Vikings, while they do rank 12th overall in terms of fantasy points allowed to running backs, when we look at teams in the bottom 12 in terms of fantasy points allowed in total on the season, they have given up the most rushing yards of any team in that mix, and still 9 total touchdowns allowed to running backs, so the second most of any team in that mix, just one below the Texans, who've allowed 10 total. So this is still a good spot for Kenneth Walker and this running attack of the Seahawks. Plus, I think this is going to be one of those games. This is the Seahawks, their first game at home in 2 weeks, facing this Minnesota Vikings team right now with Max Brosner as the starting quarterback. I just don't have a lot of faith in the Vikings going into this matchup. I think the Seahawks defense is going to show up. There's going to be the potential here for a lot of short yardage situations for the Seahawks offense at the end of the day. So I think that Walker is in a great spot. And sure, Charbonnet can always come in here, steal some thunder. He scored a touchdown this past week. You know, he can always do something, but Walker has been the more efficient back as of late. He's had 4.19 yards per carry or better in each of the last 3 games, 6.45 yards per carry in week 12 against the Titans. He's still getting some receiving work. He has still at least scored a touchdown in one of the last 2 games. So Walker, I think, is in a very good spot here. This is the first week where overall, I am feeling actually really confident in starting Kenneth Walker. So if you guys own him, very solid RB2, very solid flex option, and a player who brings you a very safe floor and should be started here in week 13 of the fantasy season. There you guys have it there, my 5 stats that you need to know before week 13 of the fantasy season. As always, guys, I'm answering as many fantasy football questions as I can in the comments down below. So drop me your guys' fantasy questions. I'll get back to as many of you guys as I can before kickoff today. While you guys are down there, does me a huge favor, helps out the channel tremendously if you guys hit that subscribe button and that like button on the way out. When the videos and playlists pop up on the screen, don't forget we have everything here on the channel that you could possibly need to dominate week 13 of the fantasy season. So make sure you guys go check out all of the content that we have for the week and the coming weeks as well. And with that, I'll say good luck here in week 13. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.